Hello world of YouTube and welcome to the listening log update for July of 2026. There are 10 albums throughout the month of July that I spun that I will be talking about in this video with time codes. So listen to the description for each individual review if you'd like to skip around in the video. There was at least one request and a handful of releases throughout July that I decided to check out with a little bit of catch-up sprinkled in for good measure. Hopefully you're excited to hear these thoughts. If you are, be sure to give it a like, and let's go ahead and get started by talking about... When I reviewed Spongecore, I talked about doing a review on this Astral Alchemy album, Weaving Chilling Magical Dreamworks, because it was the most recent band that the creator of Spongecore was a part of. And I was curious to what like a serious artistic project featuring this guy would sound like, because while one can't really glean a whole lot of depth from a lot of Spongecore, the metal stuff came from a place of, like, fandom, it felt like. It felt like it was made by somebody who liked those ideas and just wanted to make a shitpost out of it. That said, while this Astral Alchemy duo more leans into a black metal inspiration, it channels that inspiration very strongly while having this lyrical tapestry of fantastical cosmic grandiosity. I also like how, aside from those very intense, you know, shrill vocal, thin, heavy guitar, blast beat-filled moments, like you would see throughout Stars of Ruin, or when the sort of drop happens on Collapse of the Cosmos afterwards. It's those moments like the synth ambience before that in the intro of Collapse of the Cosmos, or the bridge breakdown of the Prime Offering to the Great Serpent, where they almost have this, like, alt-rock bridge with these murmuring vocals. It creates a tangent in this world that I think works relatively well. You know, while there's a lot of modern bands that incorporate different things outside of the traditional bold or sharp sounds within black metal, I like that these guys are doing their own little fun thing with it. I also like that while it has a lo-fi touch that lends to that sort of traditional black metal sound, they do find ways to let their artistry and modern ideas translate as well, like when there's moments of different types of layered guitars that come in and don't compete. You know, when they find these moments to reach a good sonic apex that brings it to a modern world. I really love that about it. You know, I like that this album also, for all of its journey that it takes the listener to throughout these songs that all have these nice meat and potatoes on them, it is a release that sort of doesn't overstay its welcome. It's a nice slice of great intensity that I feel like if you enjoy a lot of the black metal ideas, but not necessarily the entire tapestry of the genre, this has some good nuggets within it that have enough deviations that could keep a listener like that invested. This is a really strong album. I also just think that these guys, for what nuggets of tangents they do go on, they could achieve some cooler ideas, I think. And I think that, like, giving them room to breathe in a scale makes a lot of sense, because this is a really strong start, but I do feel like these guys could do more. I'm giving this an 8 out of 10, because it is very strong, but also not my favorite thing I've heard this month by and large.
You gotta be on the list, pop on a global spit with a stick. I got a pop on a song on different. I'm going knock on shit getting hit.
I want to talk about an album that overstays its welcome and also fell off fast with me. This new Future album, The Real Me, is one that I was curious to listen to, because the sort of evocative title, you know, the idea of this, like, dense, featureless track listing from an artist that I wouldn't say would never do something like this in his life, I feel like just piqued my interest, especially in the wake of the evolution of where he's gone over the last couple of years in the grander conversations in music. You know, he is an artist that, like, has had tenure, has put in his time, and very much created an icon status for himself. And so to see him go this more raw route was at least going to be interesting to me. And I feel like while there are pieces of this that I do enjoy, there's some takeaways from this that I think do fit nicely within his discography of bangers. You know, I feel like Setting the Stage on Fire with this fucking interview opener very much has this mission statement of cutting through the bullshit And even the trunk rumblings and auto-tune crooning throughout 1, 2, and No Misery After, and even Tank Top Pluto, very much evoke some very classic Future ideas and sonics that feel like he's just writing in his own pocket. You know, he's very much understands his own assignment and knows how to excel at it. You know, there comes a stretch around the middle portion of this album where it feels like it's sort of spinning in circles, both lyrically and sonically. You know, the vibes are here, but it feels like you're kind of stuck in the vibes. You know, Build a Bitch, while one of the more hook-leaning stretches around that middle bend, it's not a song that I would say is one of Future's best, and it very much, while cutting through the mustard of monotony, does not give way to a great stretch after that, because 2018 is right around the bend, and that's just one of those Future songs that I just don't fuck with at all. While the second half of the album does try to lead into a bit of a different shakeup, it is just as spotty of a shakeup as the first half. Nothing really pulls me back from that point in the back half of the record. Like, similarly to how Build a Bitch feels like a rise from the brain fuzz and rot, Kick is the inverse in a world of a little more of a mellower side of Future. I like how Kick really breaks the door down and brings the listener back into it. But in that same breath, the softer back half has other moments that do shine better than some of those moments in the front half. Like Alice. I think Alice, for its beat that sounds very, like, stock in a lot of ways, there's some ideas in there that I think work. I just don't think that it's an example of a good full version of that, in my opinion. You know, I feel like the album very much falls off, and considering it is a 22-song, 59-minute jaunt, it overstays its welcome 100%. This is not an album that I'm going to put high. This is not an album that I'm going to put back on my rotation now that July is in the rear view. I'd rather spend DX2 or Hendrix any day of the fucking week, and even those records are not ones I choose to throw on when I want to listen to rap. Because while I like Future, at least a lot of his highs of highs, this is an example of him coasting through the motions, but trying to sell it as something deeper. And it's just not wholly my bag. I'm giving it a 4 because it is a bit too much of not enough, in my opinion.
Just like the fog between the leaves, we will fulfill each other's needs, 'cause we're thick as...
If there was anything No Name proved, it's that Jack White could still do it. He still had that dog in him. Not to say that I've ever counted the guy out, because an album like Boarding House Reach also served as an example of him being able to really dazzle when he wants to. That said, the when he wants to, I feel like, really has to be a purpose to Jack White's record making. And a great example of that is his newest album, Frozen Charlotte. While a record of swagger, of that same raw sound that coded throughout No Name, what it's lacking is a lot of boldness in that raw ideology. You know, the guitar licks on here still have that nice crunch that I love from No Name, like throughout Thickest Thieves or Raising the Grains, fun swagger. There's just not enough ideas amidst that swag-tasticness that makes this the swaggiest Jack White record that I think set it as high as other highs he's reached amidst this solo stretch. Like, a lot of its ideas feel rot from other parts of his discography while also building up from No Name, but none of that culminates to the same apexes. Like, God and the Broken Ribs feels like something like continuing from something like Archduke Bishop from No Name, with its very, like, preaching to the choir style vocals that Jack is leading with on there, and tracks like Thickest Thieves or Nobody Knows feel tangential to some of the post-White Stripe stuff he was doing before he started to do solo stuff with the side projects. And even the guitars and bite and riff work on a track like You'll Never Fix Me feels ubiquitously Jack White, but none of it really stands above any of the sums of its parts that it feels like he's trying to rework and reinvent while trying to spin a new wheel on this new release. I feel like there was a sanding down of the eccentricities seen throughout like Fear of the Dawn or Boarding House Reach. That's not to say that it is a bad record. It is not an album that I will slander on a grand scale. It just feels like the least inspired Jack White record in a while, and I got a knock for that. For a guy who's really been dropping heat and showcasing that in his growing age he hasn't lost it. He hasn't shown us that he's lost it here. It just feels like he's sort of in creative limbo throughout the process of this. There's some parts of the sonic tapestry that I enjoy when they crop up, like the organ stuff, but it doesn't even stick around in ways that I thought it would upon first listen, and was kind of disappointed to see it not crop back up throughout the track listing in a more meaningful way. You know, the riff work on Derecho Domenico, or, you know, the fun chorus work on Nobody Knows, you know, the great riff that leads She's in a Frenzy is very classic Jack White still. And I love that sound, admittedly, at the end of the day. So I do like this record. I just don't love it in the way that I was hoping I would when I saw Jack was dropping a new album. I'm giving this a 7, because this is a very solid Jack White album. It is just not one that I even want to add to my collection in the same way I have in the ones that I have in recent years. It's been 5 years since we've had a Loathe album, but it's been 6 years since Loathe decided to make heavy-driven music again. And when they were teasing a return with some heaviness, I got pretty fucking excited. I liked their ambient record that came out a year after the 2020 splash. I let it in, and it took everything. But man, I really enjoyed what this band did with their love of just crushing sounds. And I like how we see those sounds evolved, but also seeing them incorporate a love of that ambience still. They keep a stage full on this album, A Stranger to You. And I like how throughout that weavings of times with a stranger, they find ways to blend these absolute ragers like Block of Fists or Gemini, which is one of my favorite songs in the album, or the even fuller weaving of density with some cosmic ideas like on Revenant. They find moments to get contemplative or even intimate in some ways. They find ways to not only weave those heavy ideas with some more hook-driven, not necessarily metal-coded sounds, like on Harder to Pretend or Fortress Down, songs that feel very almost like tangential to what like Boston Manor has flirted with creatively. They strip it back entirely or just pivot their sound into a different world altogether, like on Nothing Like the Knife, or the very sensual Fangs, a song that's sexier than I think anything Sleep Tokens tried to do in their whole career thus far. They really adorn a sonic palette on this that could have easily not come together well. The bass production on this is so much bolder than their last record in a way that feels very modern and tangential to a world that I'm very, iffy on to begin with, but I love what they do with it here, honestly. It creates a more fulfilling stage, in my opinion, and lets their ideas flirt with other pockets of the, rock realm in ways that I like seeing them do. Like, that bass riff on Meet My Maker is just filthy as fuck, man! I really enjoyed this album, and I love that these guys are finding a way to just be almost more fully realized than they ever have before, while having a through line that I think works incredibly well, in my opinion. This is another one of those ones that I wouldn't be surprised you hear me potentially talking about later on in the year, if not seeing it on the broader big list, as it were. I'm giving this an 8. It's a really strong album. I think that it is one that could be a grower, but it could also just stay where it's at. I feel like if you've wanted these guys heavier again, I would love to know what you think of this album on the other side in particular, because I think that the sonics on this are really good, but every time I spin it, I think, man, some people could really fucking hate this, but maybe that's just me.
Just got out what I heard, I'm a bit shitty. Damn, what a pity, but I smell so pretty. Ought to be a villain living.
I'm not gonna lie, when the Spider-Man movies credits rolled and Oh Yeah was the roll credits track, I was kind of surprised. Not because, like, the song is bad, just because this album also just came out, like, 2 weeks before the movie did. But I think the choice of it as this ennui after a journey of rebirth kind of makes sense. There isn't, like, the happiest ending to that movie, but it's at least an ending that sees one in a somewhat better place. You know, this is an album that feels like it's fighting the frustrations of life while airing out one's own laundry, so to speak, in the process. But I enjoy that about it. That was one of the things I thought was interesting about Gemini Rights, is that it felt like Steve was trying to cattily go at people that he wasn't happy with while trying to also light up the ones in his life that he did care about. And on Oh Yeah, we have this same drama throughout parts of the heartbeat of this. Like the almost offhand way he talks about his inability to commit on Is It Cool feels like it's trying to wear it on one's sleeve in hopes of growing past it, but also kind of feels like you're still stuck in that place. All the while, these bright, soft sonics help envelop you in this comfort of accepting that as well. It's an interesting play with the listener that goes on throughout this, because that same feeling is seen in a different world on The Feeling. It's got this chill groove coursing throughout it, but the lyrics feel like one in confrontation and perseverance. And I like that play that Steve does with the listener on this. I will say, I don't know if that posturing and attitude helps justify or hurt the existence of a song like Doom on this record, but I like that song because it's a funny fucking jam that I love the guitar production on. I think the guitar production on this record, by and large, knows when to stew and when to slide, if that makes any sense. Which isn't surprising, because I think Steve has a really good ear for guitar. That was exhibited on Gemini Rights, which was my introduction to his solo work outside of the internet, to see him do this, like, spearheaded solo project, you know what I mean? But similarly to Gemini Rights, I think that Steve's attitude and mindset is equally on display, and I think is translated well. It just has a sonic palette and an attitude it carries beneath that sonic palette that I think creates a better, or at least a more fun dynamic with the listener than Gemini Rights did, for sure. I also love that post-Doom, the album just further melts down and gives Doom this almost like start of the crash out moment that I think comes to a really nice head throughout Love, Sex, Drug Bomb. And the thing that I think really sets this album over the edge too is how it handles that post crash out throughout Nice Shoes, In Your World, that takes the record into this like 9-minute epic of dance ideas, sad, dreary guitar crescendos, and just this emotional turnaround that I think helps bring the album together and helps round it out fucking choicely. I really love that moment. When it happened the first time, I was like kind of just taken aback. I just kind of kept sitting in the vibes and listening to them evolve and just enjoying my time with it. And it's a record, and it's a song that like I enjoy the components of a lot and think that they come together nicely. It's a record that I've sat with, and I want to sit more with, because I do like the catchy moments, but I fear that the more I sit with it, some of the moments that I am not as into will sort of fall to the wayside. But the album is one of those like well-paced, tightly constructed records that doesn't overstay its welcome, and I feel like if you want some bright, fun tracks that have a little bit of heart, a little bit of drama, and a little bit of fun sprinkled throughout these mellow ideas, you've got a good listen on your hands with this record. I also like the couple of collaborations that come in on here. I think they help enhance the emotions and life that Steve is bringing on here in a way that feel fruitful, especially SZA and Erykah Badu's collaborations in particular. I like Pure Color. I think it's a good full dive into some soothing ideas and that comes into the record at a really nice point. All in all, I'd give this record like a 7 out of 10. I think that it's a solid record. I do like it a decent amount, and I think that it's got good catchy moments that I know are going to stick with me, and it's got a good rounding out of its heart and soul.
Lips sticking like a cane, coupe the main, choking on my chain, diamonds on me, so vixen feeling vain, roses.
Long-time viewer of the channel, and honestly, artist with fantastic taste, Cosmic Blue Audie, recommended and requested that I talk about this new Sha Ray and DJ Haram record, Critical Thot. Two artists I'm not really familiar with, but they are signed to Backwoods, and I do know some artists from that label and think that I've never heard anything I didn't like from that label. And I'd put this in the same caliber, even if it isn't quite what I'm used to, which is really just Billy Woods and stuff from Backwoods. But if you were to ask me what a sexy record from this label would sound like, I would assume it would sound like this. Because this album is very horny. There's a lot of just sexy-ass atmosphere coded throughout a lot of this. Whether it's doing so really softly and sensually throughout Champagne and Bouquets, which has this still just incredible rumble in its instrumental, or getting more aggressive with it like on Thot Daughter after that. It's got all shades of sexuality throughout this record, while having moments where it cuts deeper than that in ways that I would expect an artist from this label to do. Like, this album, while getting sexy, gets cutthroat on its other half in ways that are more complementary to some of the darker sides of the instrumentals of this, like they're at Shoal Ain't or Low End Skeeza, which just sounds downright filthy in the most unclean sense. I also like that after Low End Skeeza, we get this just meltdown of the record throughout Elixir to help bring this record to a really nice punctuation. There is a sort of coming around on especially the ideas seen throughout the opener, the material, that I think help bring the album back around just as thusly as the sort of Sonics doing so try to introduce. I really dug this album. While the production maybe to some can seem like it detracts from the sensuality and more enhances the unhinged and dirtier, filthier, and confrontational sides, especially on another track like Hey Queen, but like the way that they help accent the sincerity and seriousness on like Elixir and the material make the sexy moments still fit in this world in a way that just colors them differently. And I really appreciate that about it. My biggest takeaway from this is that it is one of those pocket projects that I would put on the threshold. You know, I really enjoy what it has going on, but I'm back and forth on whether I just crave more of it to the point that it affects my publication score of the album. I really dig this. If it ends up on my of the year list, it probably will be near the bottom because it is a nice concentration of grounded sexiness with some eccentric ideas, but I do still want a hell of a lot more from this. It's a 7, possibly on the lower end of an 8, but still a 7 as of the recording of this video. Thanks for the recommendation, and choice as always. Like I said during the J. Cole review earlier this year, one of the interesting side effects of doing this show once a month and only talking about new albums once a month is seeing some records' discourse evolve upon release. And sometimes my opinion does get shaped by that as well. I do listen to a record, and then I engage with it with others, and it does shape my opinion over the course of its release to when I review it, but that's kind of the point, right? That said, this Strokes album is an entirely different beast altogether because even the pre-release for this record was spelling a wild release ahead, and on the other side, This record is unfortunately not as interesting as the discourse surrounding it, which creates a different type of review for a lot of people. I wasn't hyped for it because I didn't like the AI looking ass art that was coming throughout the pre-release stuff. It felt very similar to the Void stuff in that regard, and that also wasn't helped by the abundant autotune done by Julian on Going Shopping. That said, Going Shopping as a song by the band, I like more now than upon release, but that could also be because it is one of the beacons of light in a sea of boring that is this fucking album. I don't, like, when I saw this album art, I got concerned, not because I thought it was AI generated, but because I thought that is some boring looking ass album art for a band that normally uses, like, Basquiat's and shit for their album art. And yes, I know this is from a photograph that is done by an artist himself from the 80s. I just don't think it is an album art that screams this band in the way that most of their catalog does. It's no come down machine as far as like on the lower echelon of their album art, but it's not too far off from that considering how quality they usually lean with an art direction to some degree. It just felt like the least Strokes looking record that they were selling us, and Going Shopping, while sonically having ideas that feel very like the band, it was the spirit beneath that I just wasn't looking forward to hearing more from. And that spirit really comes out and shows ass in some ways that I just don't think are all that entertaining. Psycho Shit feels like the band warning the listeners that they shouldn't have asked or shouldn't have praised at the door so much, because that invites the conversation of, what if we did more of that in a worse way? I think that it has some interesting insights on talking about discourse or discourse itself, but that also kind of taints the conversation of this record, because you're going to talk about discourse and sharing opinions on a record that sounds like this? You're going to do that on this album, guys? Come on. I would love to have been a fly on the wall for the creative process of this, and I want to know how far along they were in creating it before Julian went, what if I used auto-tune on a lot of these songs? Because the sonics of this don't feel inviting to that sort of sonic approach or that sort of component to the sound, but like it feels purposefully done to add to the conversation. Because it works at its best on a song like Psycho Shit, but it's the lyrics of Psycho Shit paired with that make for an interesting question as to why. It really feels obvious they want to speak on stuff. They want to do their part to be, forward with a message. And I like that. But I think dancing in the irony in a world on fire isn't quite the approach this time, in my opinion, guys. Lonely in the Future being the catalyst for which hit pieces on Anthony Fantano were gonna happen was not on my bingo card in 2026. But here the fuck we are, guys. What are we doing here, man? What's sad is Lonely in the Future is also one of the better songs on the album because it has a little more life to it than a majority of the album. It's shocking they want to disavow to a record like Angles, because the boring parts of this at least have that record felt in their sonics, like Going to Babylon, a song that I wish I liked more, but I think is set back because of Julian's vocals and how they don't really sound like the best produced version of this sound from a band perspective either. While he may not have done anything on that or the New Abnormal, whoever was on the boards for the New Abnormal at least helped the band sound good. I don't like this album. I'm not going to put it up there with the best in the group's catalog. I think that it's kind of rough. And I think that revisits of it make those boring and just jarring moments, all the more unsettling and uninteresting to me, to the point that this record isn't going to be high on my worst of list, but it'll be one of those teetering near the bottom of that probably, because I just don't listen to records that I dislike to this caliber all that much in the stacked ones that I dive into throughout the year. I'm giving it a 4. I was thinking a 5, maybe a 4. It's just an album that I think wants to be more interesting than it is, but because there's parts of this record that are about the conversation themselves, people are going to want to talk about it. And I appreciate that for at least wanting to open the door more, but I'm still standing at the door, wishing I hadn't liked At the Door as much in hindsight.
So he's dead, so now we're making rock music.
Charli XCX is having a very busy year between the Wuthering Heights soundtrack and this music fashion film record, something that I was not expecting to see release, considering we're like fresh off the heels of Brat Summer. It still feels like it wasn't that long ago. But I like that Charli, in, true artistic fashion, is trying to pillage forth in a direction that sees her doing something else, and I really like that about it. I like seeing Charli's creativity flourish out, and this idea of adorning guitars in a couple of different fashions amidst the sonics of this make for an interesting pivot, and one that sees her, and one that acts as a good backdrop for her to try to dance around the world of living in the grand pop sphere, but trying to find ways to ground herself amidst that mass, icon status she's kind of reached over the last couple of years. I think the first single and opener for the album, Rock Music, very much does set a good stage and give listeners a good sort of like sample for what the sounds would be. That guitar sample sounds very much like what bands like her husband's band, the 1975, were kind of experimenting with in their early era, while also trying to, reignite some of the sounds seen in, I want to say, mid-early 90s, adult contemporary sounds. But I like that after this sort of, this is the sound of the album-ass vibe that song has, she swerves into a more serious direction with Spring Summer 26, which very much feels like the self-dissection moment for Charli, and I think that it's cool that it comes early, because it does, again, further step that this album is going to kind of try to do something else than just kind of live in the club distracted. Whether that's the sort of aftershock mania that feels like throughout I'm Afraid, or the sort of almost postmodern irony throughout Card Declined. There's a mood throughout this that feels very much like a self-reflected after the party energy that I like seeing her do, especially considering it does have moments where it tries to continue on that the road she was on, so to speak, with tracks like 2007 and Wink Wink, which serve as more pop forward ass jams that almost feel like flashes of where we've been before, but in the now. I really like Wink Wink. It's another really good single from this era that I like. I think as far as the more straightforward pop stuff that she did on the Wuthering Heights soundtrack and this, I think it's a good version of that, and one that I think is up there for me for singles of the year as a really nice moment. But even those flashes in the pan of nostalgia sort of give way and come back around by the end to a much more grounded place through the eyes of Persona and No One Lasts Forever, which I think is a really, really strong closer. I think up there with 365 is a really good full circle moment to reach on an album. While I haven't listened to the B-sides compendium of this, I think it's interesting that she did make a point to focus on that side of the music construction for this record in particular. But I think that as far as the music fashion film record goes, I like it. I like its sonics. I think that it is a strong album in Charli's catalog, but I don't think it's up there amongst my personal favorites. I'm always happy to see her experimenting, and I think the experiments on here wrought out some interesting insights into inspiration and how she handles inspiration. And I think that while this won't rank amongst the tippy top of my favorites, it'll very much be one that, just like the last handful of Charli records, have been on there somewhere, because it's getting an 8. It is a strong album. It is an album that, as somebody who enjoys seeing this artist experiment, think that the experiments were still fun to listen to, and even if they got really fucking real and blunt about some things. Kenneth Bloom decides to use this Rico Nasty quick turnaround record RX as the introduction to what is going to be a stretch this year of him collaborating with a multitude of artists, almost a la what he was trying to do in 2020, but to an even broader sense, considering some of the artists in this lineup. Admittedly, I was a little surprised to see Rico Nasty amidst this lineup, because she just dropped a record last year, and from looking at the rest of her discography, she doesn't normally have a turnaround schedule like this. But I think that this is a really good collaborative piece. It continues some of the attitude seen on Rico Nasty's album last year, Lethal, and I think that Kenny's very low-end focused production helps add a lot to the aggression she's throwing throughout here. Some of the songs on here feel reactionary to some of the themes from Lethal, like on Rotation or Frenzy, or even on Blow Your Nose, where she's seemingly like casting someone away. But all the while, I think that like the synth choices and overall sonics add a lot to not only the aggression, but the sugariness to some of the hook spinning on here. It's a good pairing that I think Rico uses to help solidify that attitude, and I like the attitude of this a lot. You know, I think that it's still got some good catchy moments. I enjoy Cupcake a lot, actually. I think that its hook feels very classic, but I think that the production helps elevate it to a different realm. I also love the hook on Rotation as well. It helps add to the more aggressive side of the lyrics on here, and I like that for as short as it is, it finds a way to sort of come around on some of that aggression throughout the eyes of Kiss and Make Up. My only real issue with this is similar to some of the issues I had with the 2020 Kenny Beat stuff, in that it just feels a bit too short. It's a good concentrated dose of Rico Nasty, but I do like the album from last year a bit more, if only because it had a bit more depth to it sonically. While I enjoy the consistency on here, and I think that it gives it a different sort of appreciation, part of me really enjoyed the deviations that album had. But as far as like being a more straightforward collaborative pocket project, I think this is a solid one. It retroactively, I think, makes me like Lethal a bit more and more curious to see what she would do with more different genre twists and the like. But I think that as far as like being a decent, catchy record, this services that up pretty amicably. I'm leaning on like a 6 on this. I could see myself softening on it more. A solid, if not a little bit of a too brief of a project.
A jet box with a vacancy in the middle.
One of the most consistent bands in modern rock, Cheekface, continuing their yearly album release regiment with Podium. Their last album, Middle Spoon, got my album of the year slot. They've stayed steady in that favorites of the year placement, and needless to say, whenever they're cooking something, I'm excited for what they've got to say and how they say it. I really enjoy this band's ability to pen these songs that feel very in line with the now, but find a way to present that in a still lighthearted or at least sarcastic way. Because, hey, times are tough, but sometimes you've got to smile through it. That was one of the things I really loved about their last 2 records in particular, It's Sorted and Middle Spoon. And I feel like on Podium, they continued that trend. I like a lot of what they're saying on here and how they're saying it lyrically, but as far as changing in sonics, even if in just a somewhat subtle way, this is an example of a band shifting in a direction that I like, but not as much as where they've been recently. While I like the way that this production feels very in line with their earlier records, while not losing some of the sort of sonic additions they've added to their overall oeuvre of orchestration. I just don't think it necessarily sounds as nice to me. I enjoy also the injection of more turntables on here. I think that that's a sonic idea that suits their quirky ideas with how it's done on here. I just think that overall the sonics being as more raw as they are take away from the nuance in the picture, so to speak. One of the things I do really like about this record, from a construction perspective, is the through line. This feels like the most A to B Cheekface album, lyrically speaking. Theme presentation wise. You know, the album, I feel like, is sort of walking you through this, initially a relationship that sort of blossoms out into something more, and I like that through this entryway is where we get into the deviations of more discussion topics of the now, whether it be the approach to conversation almost in Hostile Street, to how circumnavigating that becomes a look at the world via Rent Is Down, or No Fly Zone, or EBT. I will say that through line also isn't necessarily my favorite way they have constructed a record, but I do enjoy that about this. That is all to say that I do like this album, like all of Cheekface's other records, but I just don't think I like it as much as the most recent couple of records they've done. I still think that they're dropping heat. I still think that if you like this band, you'll get some enjoyment out of this. I feel like if you enjoy music with purpose, but has fun doing so, and you haven't listened to Cheekface, while it may not be my favorite album in the band's catalog, it might be the best gateway into their quirky, yet well-harnessed personality that they've been spending this decade sort of like hammering into to get just right and adapt in ways that maybe feel fresh to them. And I like that about this band. And I like that about this album. It's them continuing to shape that idea and that identity. And I appreciate what they do with it, even if it isn't my favorite thing they've done. I'm giving this an 8 out of 10. It is a strong album in their catalog. I think the songwriting is on par with the songwriting of the last couple. I just don't like some of the other bits that make up this experience. Those are my thoughts on the records I spun in July. Do you agree with my opinions? Do you disagree? Let me know your thoughts on the records that you did listen to, along with any albums you think I should check out from this year that I haven't talked about yet in this segment, in the comments down below. Thank you again so very much for watching. If you liked it, again, make sure you give it a like. And if you want to see more, consider subscribing. I drop 2 to 4 vids a week depending on what I've got going on. I intended to have the second Yu-Gi-Oh! Done by the end of this weekend. But it's a long game. A lot longer than I anticipated when going into it. I do plan on dropping the next part within the next week, hopefully, because I've encountered my regular batch of computer problems and the like, along with getting other projects I've been working on elsewhere tied together. But either way, I'm going to go. I have been Viral Rack. You guys take care, and I will see you another day.